Recently, I've been neck deep in Nioh, barely able to keep myself from drowning in awesome. I struggle to remember enjoying any Souls-like game this thoroughly since Dark Souls 2, though that might be due to the lack of constant poison swamps, with the only one I've run into thus far being significantly less painful to deal with than the DS equivalents. Seriously, for all their faults, I actually think Blighttown and Valley of Defilement are well designed, with Blighttown legitimately being an excellent area, when it works, which is pretty much never. Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne go way too far and create areas that just aren't fun to play through. In DS3's case, poison swamps make up like 10% of the dang game. Well, anyway, the point is, while I still really enjoy Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne a ton, I didn't get the same butterflies as I did from the first three titles. Nioh has been providing that wholesale, even if I'll never again be able to capture the newness of the Souls-like genre itself. One thing I think is particularly interesting about Nioh is how it in many ways compares to Bloodborne, in terms of an attempt to create a more action-oriented Souls-like experience. Both games make very different choices to create a similar feel, so I thought we could explore that a bit. One of the main changes Bloodborne makes to the formula comes down to the lack of defensive options the player has. The game pushes this idea pretty hard, even giving you a shield only to make fun of anyone who chooses to use shields. I find this interesting, not because it doesn't work, but because it actually feels like the easy solution. Many people, when Bloodborne came out, touted this change as a genius choice that only our Lord Miyazaki could have come up with. A lot of people even started arguing that you literally cannot have an action-oriented Souls-like if you let the player block attacks. But if you actually think about it on its own, it kind of comes off as a lazy choice. In comes Nioh, a game where every single weapon gives the player the ability to block. And not only that, but every single weapon blocks for 100% damage reduction, which gives the player even more defensive capabilities than you have in Dark Souls. And yet, it arguably plays faster than Bloodborne, and players tend to play it even more aggressively. But why is that? It doesn't make any sense on the surface. I think there are a few reasons for this, which all compound to create an experience that Souls/Bloodborne itself actually has staunchly tried to avoid. First things first, Nioh's movement, both enemy and player, is just generally capable of higher speeds. While Nioh still gives enemies some rather large windups and recoveries, there are also many more moments where enemies will start an attack and then combo it into several others extremely swiftly. Meanwhile, William himself responds to inputs faster due to his own lesser windups and recoveries. It takes several frames longer for the player to begin sprinting in Bloodborne, and even when you do, it's slower than Nioh. I captured footage for Nioh first because it's the game I was playing, and I had to wait to reinstall Bloodborne. And when I got to Bloodborne, wow, it was difficult to play compared to Nioh, because I was so used to the speed Nioh had. Bloodborne is way slower overall, even though compared to Dark Souls it feels really fast. To add to this, many more animations are cancelable in Nioh. Dark Souls is known for the commitment a player needs to have when performing different actions, because most actions aren't cancelable. You can cancel the very end of drinking an Estus and things like that, but otherwise most actions have to be completed in their entirety before you can do something else. It's written into the core of its DNA, and this is a fundamental difference Souls scholars will bring up when comparing it to games like Devil May Cry. Though Bloodborne sped many of these actions up overall compared to Dark Souls, it still largely doesn't allow the player to cancel out of most animations. This means if you want to swing your weapon, you'd better be prepared for the consequences that may bring along with. This means that despite the speed upgrade, Bloodborne still pushes players to find optimal openings in a lot of instances. It means that even though the player is in control of the action to a large degree, there are still many moments where it's smarter to play a bit defensively and timid. Nioh, likewise, allows players to cancel large sections of mini recovery animations, as long as you're canceling into the right move. It's remarkably similar to fighting games in this way. Essentially, this puts more of the control directly into the hands of the player. Though you totally can play defensively through both dodges and blocking, you also have a lot more options for creating openings. Yet another choice that puzzle pieces its way into perfect harmony here is in the fact that Nioh gives the player a lot of nuanced choice for how swift they want their attacks to be. Bloodborne essentially breaks itself down into two categories, light and heavy attacks. Nioh likewise gives the player 3 different stances to play with, low, mid, and high, which obviously translate to light, medium, and heavy attacks. Light attacks in Bloodborne are about as swift as regular medium attacks in Nioh. So not only does Nioh give the player a 3rd category that's even faster than anything Bloodborne gives you access to, unless you use my favorite weapon, the Blade of Mercy, but it also gives you light and heavy variants of attacks from each of these 3 stances, and skills unique to each stance that you can equip. Too much windup on your attack to deal with an enemy? Use the super quick knee kick to create an opening. Want to eat your enemy's ki up quick? Switch to the high stance and use a heavy combo from afar. Now, one smart change that I think Bloodborne made, which Nioh chose not to, deals with equipment weight. In Bloodborne, it doesn't exist. No matter what, players will always be able to play at the same base speed. Nioh goes the Dark Souls 2 route, where there are basically 4 categories, but the first 2 are super easy to maintain. The lightest category gives the player access to max speed and agility. The second one cuts things like running speed, sprinting speed, and dodge distance just a bit. The third cuts them by quite a bit more, but requires wearing rather heavy equipment. And the final is unusable to the point that it tires William out just to attempt a roll. Funnily enough, I couldn't actually capture footage of this because my stats were so high that I didn't have heavy enough equipment to reach that level. But the point is, he basically stumbles, all of his stamina disappears, and then he sits there doubled over for a few seconds. To counter this, the heavier you are, the less stamina blocking takes. I don't necessarily think this negatively impacts Nioh, and it gels well with the fact that the game has randomly generated stat scaling equipment. And as a quick side note, this is one of the only action-oriented games where that actually doesn't upset the balance to a horrible degree. With such variety in equipment, and with the ability to suddenly just get a really high defense helmet or something, there needs to be some sort of downside to equipping it. Otherwise, 90% of the equipment you find is obsolete the instant you find it. Because at that point, the only thing that matters is which one has better defense. As for Bloodborne, since it still uses the scripted design for finding equipment that all of the Souls games use, there really is no need for equipment weight to be a factor. Including it would have actually had the same effect on Bloodborne that not including it would have on Nioh. Most of the heavier equipment would be all but useless as soon as you get it, because in Bloodborne, speed is everything. I do think Bloodborne does come out slightly on top here though, because despite it being extremely unlikely that you'll ever hit the 2 highest weight classes in Nioh, and if you do feel like you need that much defense, you're doing something wrong, that still restricts the player's options to some degree. Bloodborne does not, which feels a bit refreshing. I don't have to think about anything but what my armor provides me. The most important change that was made in Bloodborne and Nioh, however, is actually the most genius change, and despite being used differently in both games, it's the same concept at the core. One incentivizes direct aggression in the face of failure, and the other incentivizes direct aggression in the face of success. These concepts are Bloodborne's rally system and Nioh's ki pulse system. If you stop for a moment and think about it, you'll probably realize that these are actually both the same idea, just handled in different ways. Bloodborne's rallies essentially reward a player who has taken damage by giving them some of their lost health back if they can hit their enemy quickly enough. This asks players to employ more risk-oriented tactics when in the face of adversity. Likewise, Nioh's ki pulse allows players to instantly regain any lost stamina by using a well-timed button press after a combo. In a vacuum, this almost allows players to infinitely combo without ever running out of stamina. But in practice, the environment, enemy poise, other enemies or obstacles, enemies blocking in the tiny interim between combos, and the fact that your stamina always slightly decreases more than you can make up for, all prevent this from ever happening. Both of these systems come with problems. Against a lot of the enemy types in Nioh, it's really easy to just combo mash / key pulse enemies into oblivion, leading to a bit of monotony. And in Bloodborne, there are a lot of enemies that can just be wailed on, full well knowing that you can just tank their attacks and get your health back directly afterward. Both can hurt the strategic depth of their games a bit in their own ways, but I don't think either actually has a big enough impact to mar the experience as a whole. Though, one important thing to note is that Nioh's choice once again allows the game to have a more consistent rate of actions per minute, leading to an overall swifter experience, and it puts yet more aggressive options into the hands of the player. Rallying changes how the player thinks when they play. Key Pulse changes how the player can play. And it's not like it doesn't come with a punishment either. Miss a key pulse or two and you're likely to run out of ki. Get hit during this, and William will double over, unable to take any action for what feels like an eternity, just like when he goes over the weight limit. So the game still wants you to play smart, not just blindly aggressive. I think reflection upon these two games can teach us something, which is that mechanics and ideas alone don't make for a good or bad experience. It's extremely common to hear people claim that a certain design decision ruins an experience or is incompatible with a game or a series. But it's very rare to hear those people explain how said decision actually does this. People tend to complain about mechanics and ideas from an aesthetic, almost visceral perspective, instead of from an analytical one. What's important isn't that a mechanic or idea exists in a game, but rather how it interacts with the other choices around it. Context matters. After Bloodborne came out, many people claimed that throwing shields out was required for a Souls-like to be more action-oriented and aggressive. And yet, as we proved here, Nioh says otherwise. It still ends up being faster paced and more aggressive than Bloodborne in the process too. Next time a game takes a radical approach to something we've come to love, we really should give that game a chance, and see if the developers were smart enough to compensate for the changes they made, by making other changes to better suit them. What do you think? Have you played Nioh or Bloodborne? Which one do you feel is more aggressive and why? Which one do you like more? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you next video. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.